Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. So here's a thought. If generative AI is already showing this, potential to double workplace productivity in some areas, why does it feel like the most common office chatter is still about who's safe from it rather than who's actually thriving with it? It's a strange contradiction, isn't it? I mean, we all remember the failed predictions from just a few years back. The metaverse, right? That was supposed to be the next massive thing. There was that huge projection, was it $5 trillion by 2030? And suddenly every big company seemed to need a chief metaverse officer. And then, well, it just kind of fizzled out. It felt like all hype with very little, measurable reality behind it.
Exactly. And that contrast is precisely why this conversation about generative AI is so important right now. Because AI is plainly not the metaverse. It's different. Sure, some firms might be feeling a bit, let's say, disillusioned because they haven't instantly seen, a 10x return on investment. But the actual atmosphere in the office, that has undeniably changed. AI is moving past being just a novelty. It's becoming, well, standard operating procedure in many places.
Right. So our mission today really is to look beyond just the surface level numbers, the adoption stats. We need to critically unpack where the fundamental nature of white-collar work is actually shifting, focusing specifically on those structural changes, how work processes are being repartitioned, the sort of quiet implications of standardization, and also those risks that maybe don't get talked about enough, like algorithmic surveillance. That's creeping in right now.
Mm-hmm. It's really about moving from just, anecdotal use cases here and there towards understanding the potential for systemic transformation.
Okay, so let's ground this first. Let's unpack it with some basic data just to confirm the scale we're talking about.
Yeah.
Because the usage explosion, it's definitely real. We've got Gallup data showing that U.S. employee usage of AI at work, it's nearly doubled just since 2023. It's now sitting around, 40%? So it's clearly not some niche tool anymore. And another source we looked at, it uses OpenAI's data, working with the economist David Duchaming. It really documents the sheer volume, the daily average number of work-related messages sent to these models. It just zoomed from about 213 million to 716 million in just 1 year. That confirms we're talking about, infrastructure level scale, something like 700 million weekly active users across their various products. Huge numbers.
Yeah, the volume's staggering. But what's really fascinating here, I think, is not just the amount of interaction, but the kind of interaction. The Anthropic Economic Index, it analyzes these patterns. And it found something really crucial for the first time, actually. Automation-style prompts have now significantly overtaken augmentation prompts.
Okay, can you maybe clarify that distinction, augmentation versus automation, for the listener?
Absolutely. So augmentation is more collaborative, right? Think, help me brainstorm 5 titles for this presentation, or maybe co-write this next paragraph with me. It's working with the AI. Automation, on the other hand, it's more directive. It's take this pile of data and draft the Q4 summary, or do tasks X, Y, and Z based on this document. This shift suggests users are getting much more comfortable delegating entire tasks wholesale, not just using AI as a kind of, brainstorming partner or sounding board.
Right.
It represents a pretty fundamental shift in trust, I'd say. We've moved past treating it like maybe a junior intern you have to constantly check in on, to treating it more like a specialized function you actually trust to execute a defined task.
That does feel like a profound conceptual leap. And you can see that cultural shift reflected almost immediately in the most mundane parts of office life, like meetings. Meeting culture itself is now basically machine-readable by default, isn't it? Think about it. Every discussion is just routinely transcribed, summarized, filed away somewhere. It instantly becomes part of the company's, quote, historical record. So AI stops being this novelty you might choose to use, and instead becomes the default setting for a lot of team software. And this cultural adoption, it feels pervasive. You hear it in the office chatter, right? That sort of water cooler talk has shifted. So how do you use it? That's now a completely normal, everyday question. It shows AI has moved out from being hidden away in secret skunkworks projects to becoming expected, even measurable experimentation. Which that measurable part is where some trouble starts. But we'll definitely circle back to that when we talk about surveillance.
Yeah, and that chatter also reveals an immediate consequence, which is the impact on the quality and style of communication, particularly writing. The models, they are superb at grammar and structure, which is nice, fewer typos landing on your desk. But they are often less reliable when it comes to facts and, critically, originality. So the result is this phenomenon we're seeing pretty widely now. You get these confidently delivered factual errors, often wrapped up in this highly polished but very generic prose. We're seeing this gradual drift towards, well, sterile, almost bureaucratic language. One source we saw had a great term for it: lightly chlorinated correspondence.
Ah, that's perfect. Lightly chlorinated correspondence. It sounds professional, clean, but it has absolutely no taste, no flavor.
Exactly right. Imagine getting this perfectly worded email. It explains some complex process, maybe, but it uses 3 dense paragraphs of impeccable jargon to say basically nothing new. It's polished, sure, but it feels hollow. It lacks, I don't know, flavor, urgency, maybe just human depth. And this is precisely why writing and summarizing tasks are really dominating the current use of generative AI at work. People seem to be prioritizing that surface-level fluency and structure over, perhaps, accuracy and genuine originality.
Okay, so if the content is maybe becoming more generic, the underlying tech infrastructure, though, that seems to be getting really specific. And here's where it gets, well, quite interesting, I think. The jargon itself is mutating. It's matching the technology's growing maturity. We're moving beyond just buzzwords.
Yeah.
You know, people who aren't deep in the tech might still throw around terms like alignment, maybe, but the engineering focus has shifted dramatically. They've moved on from RAG, it's retrieval augmented generation, to something called MCP, Model Context Protocol. Now, RA, that was basically about giving the model some external documents to read before it answered your question. Kind of clunky, though.
That's right. RAG was essentially the, let's call it the prototype for giving AI some memory, some context beyond its training data. But as you said, clunky. It's just not scalable or auditable enough for serious corporate systems. MCP is the logical next step. It's rapidly becoming the kind of USB-C for AI, a standard way to wire these large language models safely and consistently into corporate tools and data streams.
Okay, but why is that standardization, that wiring, so important for this discussion? It sounds a bit like, you know, nerd trivia for the engineers.
Well, it might sound technical, but it's really the difference between AI being a kind of interesting chat toy versus becoming core business plumbing. The real story behind MCP is that it enables proper integration and, crucially, governance. The standardization allows for safe, structured connections from the models directly into internal corporate systems. Think about what that means. The AI could now reliably and securely do things like approve certain invoices or draft a standard request for proposal, maybe update your CRM database based on some validated trigger. And this is what enables what people are calling agentic workflows. An agent is basically just a system that can carry out a multi-step autonomous task within your company's environment. And the standardization through protocols like MCP provides the essential pieces: the authentication, the security layers, and critically, the audit logs. You need those logs to ensure the model isn't just running wild doing things it shouldn't. Without this kind of structured approach, honestly, AI simply cannot be trusted to touch serious, sensitive business processes.
Okay, so if the tech is shifting from being just a helper, an augmenter, towards being an actual executor of processes, what does this all mean for, say, the future org chart? The article we read largely frames AI as this simple productivity layer just added on top of existing workflows. But that automation tilt you mentioned, the wholesale delegation, that suggests teams are quietly, maybe even unconsciously, starting to fundamentally repartition work.
Yes, this is the core structural shift that often gets understated, I think. The work itself is being sort of cleaved into 2 distinct functions now. You have models doing the initial drafting and execution, and then you have humans shifting almost entirely towards review, correction, verification.
Right, and the implications of that repartitioning for careers. If the model is now handling, say, 80% of the first draft of a contract or a marketing brief or some legal filing, what happens to the traditional entry-level job?
Exactly. That entry-level drafting work, the kind of drudgery that historically built baseline competence and expertise for junior staff, much of that is now being automated away. So if an organization fully shifts to a model where the default is always refining an AI draft rather than creating an original one from scratch, well, they might start changing their hiring profiles. They might quietly begin looking for more experienced reviewers, people skilled in critical assessment, and fewer junior drafters. It actually changes the definition of what competence means in many white-collar roles. Suddenly, maybe the most valuable skill isn't fluent writing anymore. Maybe it's critical verification and really nuanced correction.
Which puts tremendous pressure on quality control, doesn't it? And we should probably point out an omission in the general framing here. This idea that everyone's experimenting, well, that does not automatically mean everyone benefits. Adoption is clearly going to be highly uneven across different companies, different roles. Just installing a model and encouraging people to play with it doesn't guarantee any real return.
Yeah. And this raises a really important question you should probably be asking yourself right now. The automation gap. It's opening up as we speak. And this gap isn't really about how many people use AI. It's the growing chasm between firms that truly systematize it. You know, the ones building proper templates, tool chains, governance structures, quality checks, and those that just let usage sprawl informally, without any real structure or shared best practices. That systematic gap, much more than any lingering metaverse vibes, is what will likely separate the productivity leaders from the laggards over the next few years. Standardization really is key.
Okay, let's pivot slightly and talk about an underplayed risk that's tied directly to that potential for standardization and measurement: surveillance. We mentioned dashboards earlier, the ones monitoring employee AI adoption. When those AI-used dashboards start feeding directly into things like performance reviews, well, you immediately create at least two major problems that could actually counteract any productivity gains.
The first one is what some people are calling compliance theater. Essentially, you're measuring input, not output. Staff quickly realize that their promotion, or maybe their bonus, depends on showing a high volume of prompts or interactions with the AI, regardless of whether those interactions actually led to any meaningful work or better outcomes. So you end up with employees just prioritizing prompt volume simply to hit a metric. It distracts them from focusing on real results. Volume just doesn't equal value here.
Yeah, I can easily picture someone just prompting the AI 10 times with slightly different versions of a simple request, purely to game that dashboard metric.
It's almost inevitable, isn't it? And the second major risk is privacy creep. Think back to those default-on meeting transcripts we discussed. That perpetual historical record. That data can easily outlive its original context. You know, a casual comment someone made in a TeamSync meeting, transcribed, indexed by AI, could later be searched and potentially used in performance reviews or even disciplinary actions in ways nobody intended at the time. This is highly sensitive data that's now just being generated constantly by default in many organizations.
So if we connect this back to the bigger picture then, how do we mitigate these kinds of risks? Sounds like managing AI effectively requires some explicit, dedicated, and probably quite boring governance, not just shiny new software installs.
Oh, absolutely. Boring but essential. And the manager's job, it changes quite significantly. First, you've got to ditch those simplistic prompt volume metrics. Managers absolutely must measure outcomes. Things like project turnaround time, defect rates in code or documents, customer satisfaction scores. Focus on the results, not just the AI messages sent. Second, regarding those meeting transcripts, organizations have to treat default-on recording and the resulting transcripts almost like they are source code for software. That means requiring clear, established policies. Who can view them? How long does the company retain them? Crucially, how can staff request correction or even deletion of inaccurate or out-of-context information? Transparency here is absolutely key to building trust.
Okay, what about the more technical side, those agentic workflows, the MCP connections you mentioned? If the AI is now calling internal corporate tools, that sounds like a potentially massive security risk too.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and it needs to be treated as such. When you're talking about AI agents having access to internal corporate tools, you really must treat those MCP-enabled actions with the same level of rigor as SOX-level controls, you know, the kind of controls you'd apply to critical financial reporting systems. Every single tool the model might be allowed to call needs strict least privilege scopes. You need rigorous logging of every action. You need documented break glass procedures for emergencies. You simply cannot let the model have sort of carte blanche access across the entire corporate network. That's asking for trouble.
And finally, we touched on that risk of lightly chlorinated correspondence. If the model is very fluent but occasionally gets the facts wrong, how do we solve that tension?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. You really need mandatory verification steps built into the workflow. Since these models tend to upgrade their polish and fluency much faster than their factual accuracy, you have to pair any writing boost they provide with mandatory verification. Things like requiring cited sources that are linked, performing specific claim checks against reliable data. Organizations basically need to train their staff for factfulness and critical thinking just as much as they encourage AI fluency. Because the AI handles the fluency part beautifully, but the truth part, that still needs human oversight.
So the final synthesis here seems pretty clear. Generative AI has successfully avoided the fate of the metaverse precisely because it is fundamentally repartitioning actual office work. Everything from drafting simple emails all the way up to integrating complex corporate systems. It's real, it feels structural, and it's definitely changing who companies need to hire and what skills are valued.
Yeah, I think the ultimate bottom line is this. The real upside of AI tends to be realized when you carefully standardize a few high-value automations, and then you rigorously govern the data exhaust that generates. The real downside, conversely, shows up when leadership gets distracted and tries to manage usage, the activity, the prompt counts, instead of focusing squarely on the outcomes. And that, I think, is the core question you really need to be mulling over right now, whether you're a manager or you're an employee. Are you or is your team being managed for compliance theater? Or are you being managed for real, tangible results?
Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs, and don't forget to like, comment, and share.